Imagine being told that everything you thought you knew about relationships, desire, and power was only half the truth. What if there was a deeper layer, buried beneath centuries of social conditioning, that most have never even glimpsed? And what if I told you that Socrates himself held the key to understanding a side of women that society has been too afraid to confront for thousands of years? This is not just another philosophical discussion. It's an exploration that could shake the very foundations of your worldview. In this video, we'll venture into a realm that many fear, some deny, and a few brave souls dare to explore. By the end, I promise you will see the world and yourself through a lens so clear that it will be impossible to return to ignorance. And yes, the final revelation is the most powerful of all. Before we dive deeper, I invite you to subscribe, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments, because your insights and questions fuel conversations that truly matter. Share this video if it awakens something within you. We're only just getting started, and trust me, the discoveries ahead are not what you expect. Now, back to Socrates. Socrates never wrote a single book, yet his legacy defines the soul of Western philosophy. He wandered the streets of Athens barefoot and bold, questioning politicians, poets, and common folk alike. But there was one subject, perhaps more dangerous than politics or theology, that he often avoided discussing: the nature of women, their desires, and the influence they wield, often invisibly. Socrates was no stranger to the power women held. His own wife, Xanthippe, was described as sharp-tongued and assertive, constantly challenging him. Many dismissed her as difficult, but why would a mind like Socrates, a seeker of truth, choose to live with someone like her? Could it be that even in that challenging relationship, Socrates found a lesson? The truth is, Socrates recognized something that few dared to acknowledge. Beneath the surface of society, women have always possessed a power that transcends the visible, a power that reshapes the emotional, psychological, and social fabric of the world without ever needing to declare it. But here's the paradox. In public, ancient Athenian women were expected to be silent, modest, and obedient. Yet in the private sphere, within families, in intimacy, and in the shaping of sons and warriors, they held a different kind of dominion, a soft power, unspoken authority. What if that power still exists today, quietly operating in modern life, influencing decisions, steering relationships, and shaping identities, all while remaining unacknowledged? Socrates didn't just challenge the political leaders or the poets of his time. He challenged the very essence of human thought. In his search for wisdom, he didn't rely on textbooks or structured doctrines. He relied on questions. In fact, he believed that asking the right questions was far more important than knowing the right answers. This philosophy led him to explore the deepest parts of human nature, where assumptions and ideals often cloud the truth. But one question, in particular, stood above all others in his mind. What does it mean to live a virtuous life? And intertwined within this question, like a shadow, was another that he rarely dared to fully confront. What do women truly desire? Socrates' approach wasn't about preaching answers. It was about forcing others to confront their assumptions, peeling away the layers of social conditioning. It was a kind of intellectual surgery that exposed the raw, unspoken truths that governed human relationships. And when it came to women, those truths were some of the most elusive and dangerous. While Socrates himself never wrote a word, his legacy was immortalized by his students, most notably Plato. Through the dialogues recorded by Plato, Socrates' ideas lived on, quietly shaping the philosophical landscape of the Western world. Yet, within these dialogues, there are whispers of something much more powerful: the unspoken influence of women. In his interactions with his followers, Socrates often used his sharp intellect to unearth deeper meanings, pushing those around him to acknowledge the forces that shaped their behavior. His method was subtle, almost hypnotic, but powerful enough to transform lives. So, it's no surprise that when he questioned women, the very fabric of societal norms was tested. What could Socrates have seen in the women of his time that so many men missed? Perhaps it wasn't just their desires, but their quiet mastery of influence, their unacknowledged power, the way they could guide events with a soft word, a gesture, or even a look while society insisted they remain in the background, invisible, their true power unrecognized. Socrates saw this dynamic clearly, even though few others did. And so, he posed a question that most men were too afraid to ask. What if the most powerful forces in the world weren't the loudest or most visible, but the quiet, subtle influences that shaped society from the shadows. Xanthippe, Socrates' wife, has long been remembered as a sharp-tongued, assertive woman who, by many accounts, didn't hesitate to challenge her famous husband. In the historical records, Xanthippe is often painted in a less than favorable light, described as quarrelsome and difficult. But as with many things in history, the truth may be far more nuanced. Why would Socrates, a man devoted to seeking truth and wisdom, remain in a marriage with someone as challenging as Xanthippe? Was she truly as difficult as the ancient accounts suggest, or was there something more at play here? Perhaps Socrates' relationship with her was more than just a domestic arrangement. It was a reflection of his deeper philosophical principles. In a society where women were expected to remain silent, obedient, and behind the scenes, Xanthippe was different. She wasn't afraid to confront her husband, to challenge his ideas, or to voice her own opinion. This alone was a radical act. It's easy to imagine that Socrates, ever the seeker of truth, saw something in her that others didn't. Perhaps it was her ability to question, to push boundaries, and to reveal the vulnerabilities of the powerful, even him. Socrates, in his wisdom, might have recognized that there was more to women than society was willing to acknowledge. Behind the veil of modesty and silence, women like Xanthippe held a certain power, one that didn't shout, but resonated deeply beneath the surface. This was not the type of power that demanded attention, but it was the kind that commanded respect, a quiet authority that shaped the world in ways often overlooked. Through his interactions with Xanthippe, Socrates may have been exposed to the duality of the feminine often invisible yet incredibly powerful force. She wasn't just a wife, she was a mirror to Socrates' own journey. Her challenge to him wasn't just a personal dynamic, it was an invitation to see beyond the surface, to explore the unseen forces at work in all relationships. As Socrates' life unfolds through his dialogues, Xanthippe's influence quietly lingers in the background, shaping his philosophical inquiries. Perhaps she understood the true essence of power better than anyone else, that it doesn't always come from control, but from the ability to challenge and transform those around you, even without saying a word. As we delve deeper into the nature of women's power, we must confront a paradox that has existed throughout history. The most powerful forces in society are often the ones that go unseen. For centuries, women have been expected to stay in the background, to remain silent and obedient, especially in public life. Yet in the shadows, where the real shaping of society occurs, women have held a unique and profound influence, one that often goes unrecognized, even by those who benefit from it. This power is not the loud, visible kind that demands attention. It is not the type of authority that is celebrated in history books or in the public square. Instead, it is a quieter, more subtle form of influence, one that operates on the emotional, psychological, and social levels. It is the power of suggestion, of intuition, of creating spaces in which others can grow, change, and evolve without ever fully realizing the role they are playing. Take, for instance, the influence of mothers. Historically, women have shaped the minds of children, often molding the leaders of tomorrow with their nurturing guidance. And yet, despite this immense power, they remain largely invisible in the narratives of history. Their influence is often relegated to the private sphere, dismissed as women's work, while the more public political forms of power are celebrated and elevated. But this is not an absence of power, it is the strategic use of power. Women have learned to wield their influence in ways that avoid confrontation and demand little fanfare. In doing so, they have been able to shape the world in profound ways without ever needing to claim credit for it. This is the power of quiet authority, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but still commands everything. What if this power is still alive today? What if the silent, emotional, and psychological influence that women have always held still exists in our modern relationships, guiding decisions, steering the course of families, careers, and even entire nations, all while remaining unacknowledged? Could it be that the world would be very different if we recognized this power for what it truly is? In the end, this is the most difficult challenge we face, to acknowledge that some of the most influential forces in our lives are invisible, operating beneath the surface in ways we rarely acknowledge, let alone understand. Women have always held a form of power that transcends what society typically recognizes. But recognizing it requires us to look deeper, to peel away the layers of history and social conditioning, and to confront the uncomfortable truth that the world is shaped not just by the visible, but by the hidden as well. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, introduced the concept of the animath, unconscious feminine aspect within every man's psyche. It's a powerful, invisible force that influences men's relationships, desires, and behaviors, yet many are completely unaware of it. Jung believed that the anima is more than just an archetype. It is a profound force, deeply embedded in the human unconscious, which influences men in ways they can't fully comprehend. Jung saw the anima as a guide, a reflection of the feminine energy within men that they often project onto women. But, just as Socrates challenged the norms of his time, Jung understood that if a man was unaware of his anima, it would not simply disappear. It would take hold of him from the shadows, driving his relationships, his choices, and even his sense of identity. This is the essence of the hidden power that women possess in the psyche of every man. While men may not always understand it, the anima is there, lurking beneath the surface, influencing every interaction. The anima is not just a part of the mind, it is a part of the emotional and psychological framework that shapes how men perceive women, their desires, and their understanding of relationships. When this inner feminine force meets the real women in men's lives, it can create profound dissonance. Are they interacting with real women, or are they projecting an idealized version of the anima onto them? Most men never ask this question, and this lack of awareness keeps them trapped in cycles of attraction, confusion, resentment, and longing. The anima is often both alluring and dangerous. It can inspire creativity, awaken deep emotions, and provoke powerful desires. Yet it also confuses, distorts, and drives men to seek fulfillment outside themselves often. In women who mirror this unconscious projection, the consequences of this dynamic can be destructive, as men may never truly see the woman in front of them, but only the projection of their own needs, fears, and desires. But here's the twist. The anima, like the feminine, is not inherently a force of manipulation, it is a force of transformation. It invites men to confront themselves, to explore their deepest insecurities, and to become whole by integrating both their masculine and feminine aspects. However, this journey requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and the courage to face the parts of themselves they may prefer to ignore. What happens when a man becomes aware of the anima? How does his perception of women change when he recognizes that his relationships with them are not just about external attraction, but also about the deeper, often unconscious forces at play? This is where Socrates' teachings align perfectly with Jung's insights. Both men understood that true wisdom comes from self-awareness, and that only by knowing the self, both the conscious and unconscious parts, can one begin to understand the complexities of human relationships. Socrates was known for asking questions that would destabilize the foundations of his interlocutors' beliefs. He was a master at peeling away the layers of assumptions that people held, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their world. His method was revolutionary. He did not provide answers. Instead, he led others to question their own answers, leading them down a path where the familiar world they had built for themselves often crumbled. But what if the most dangerous question Socrates asked wasn't about politics, ethics, or virtue? What if it was a question that pierced the heart of human relationships? A question that, if answered honestly, would challenge the very way men and women relate to each other. That question, of course, is this: what do women truly want? For Socrates, the answer was never as simple as the outward appearances might suggest. The pursuit of truth wasn't just about intellectual understanding, it was about emotional and psychological revelation. In asking this question, Socrates did not seek a simple answer. He sought to reveal the hidden dynamics, the invisible forces that shaped men's desires and behaviors towards women. By exposing these deeper layers, he was asking men to confront something far more difficult than just romantic desires or societal roles. He was asking them to look within themselves. In doing so, Socrates challenged not only the men of his time, but also future generations, to examine their assumptions about gender, power, and relationships. For centuries, women have been reduced to mere symbols, desires to be conquered, mysteries to be solved, ideals to be worshipped. But what if these projections were not only wrong but harmful? What if men's inability to truly see women was the source of many of the frustrations and confusion in their relationships? Socrates recognized that the true question was not, what do women want? But rather, what assumptions am I making about women that are blinding me to the truth? In doing so, he uncovered a truth that was as profound as it was uncomfortable. Many men never truly understand women. not because of any inherent mystery on the part of women, but because of their own projections and unconscious biases. The power in this question lies in its ability to strip away the illusions that men build around women. When these illusions are dissolved, the true nature of women is revealed not as the symbols of desire or ideals of beauty that society constructs, but as fully realized individuals with their own complex needs, desires, and inner worlds. What would happen if we, today, dared to ask the same question? What if we set aside our own projections and truly saw women for who they are, rather than who we've been conditioned to believe they are? What if we were brave enough to examine not only what women desire, but also the ways in which our own unconscious beliefs about women have shaped our relationships and actions? The path to understanding the feminine is not a simple one. It's not about finding the right answer, but about constantly questioning, challenging, and expanding our view of women and the role they play in our lives. This, Socrates knew, was the key to wisdom, and it's a path that, if taken, can lead to a deeper, more authentic connection, not just with women, but with ourselves. For centuries, the feminine has been relegated to myth and mystery, its true power hidden beneath layers of cultural suppression. In ancient times, women were viewed not only as the bearers of life, but also as the mysterious forces that shaped the very fabric of human existence. Yet, throughout history, society has often turned a blind eye to the true depth of feminine power. Instead, women were reduced to symbols, shadows, and ideals, silent, passive beings, whose influence was only visible in the most limited of roles. The myths surrounding women often placed them on pedestals as objects of desire or portrayed them as dangerous temptresses, whose power was to be feared and controlled. These cultural narratives reinforced the idea that women, with their emotions, intuition, and inherent mystery, were forces that needed to be kept in check. But what if these myths were not just stories? What if they were psychological truths, reflections of the deeper, hidden aspects of the feminine that society has been too afraid to confront? The truth is that the feminine, in all its forms, has always held a certain mystique. It is a force that cannot be easily defined or controlled. It is not about domination or submission, but about transformation, about breaking down old paradigms and revealing the hidden, uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Yet, for much of history, this force has been suppressed. Society has taught us to fear it, to push it to the edges, to keep it silent, and in doing so, we have lost the opportunity to understand it. But what if we were to reclaim the feminine? What if, instead of viewing it as something to be tamed or controlled, we recognized it as an essential and powerful force that has always been a part of us? What if we allowed the feminine to reveal its true potential, not as something outside ourselves, but as an internal energy that can help us connect more deeply with who we are? In this light, the suppression of the feminine is not just a social issue, it is a spiritual one. It is about denying the fullness of human experience and rejecting parts of ourselves that are deemed inconvenient, uncomfortable, or difficult to control. But true growth and wisdom come from embracing the complexity of the feminine and understanding its vital role in our lives. By exploring the myths that have shaped our perception of women, we can begin to break down the barriers that have kept us from fully understanding them, and in doing so, we can better understand ourselves. Throughout history, women have been taught to remain silent, to hold back their true voices and desires, especially in public spaces. But what if this silence was never a sign of weakness? What if, instead, it was a strategic choice, a way to navigate a world that sought to suppress their power while still maintaining it? Silence has often been seen as the absence of influence, but in reality, it has been a powerful tool in women's ability to shape relationships and societies. In the private sphere, where women could not openly assert themselves, their power remained quiet and hidden, but no less effective. Through their actions, their subtle gestures, and their ability to listen deeply, women have held the reins of emotional and psychological power without ever needing to speak loudly or demand attention. Consider the role of mothers, for example. In a society that has often demanded silence from women, mothers have been the quiet architects of the next generation. Through their nurturing, their ability to influence without force, and their instinctive understanding of emotional currents, they shaped leaders, thinkers, and creators. Yet their contributions were often overlooked or undervalued. The strategic use of silence isn't confined to motherhood. However, it can be seen throughout history in women's relationships with their partners, in their roles as confidants, advisors, and healers. Women have known that sometimes the most powerful thing they could do was to say nothing at all, to let silence speak louder than words ever could. Silence in this context becomes a tool of wisdom, one that allows women to observe, understand, and, when the time is right, act with unspoken authority. This quiet power is not passive, it is active and deliberate. Silence allows women to remain untethered from the expectations that society places upon them, to sidestep the traps of approval-seeking and validation that ensnare many. It provides them with the space to operate outside the boundaries that others have set for them, to wield influence without ever needing to claim it. What would happen if we, as a society, acknowledged the power in silence? What if we stopped seeing women's quietness as a sign of weakness, and instead recognized it as a form of strength, one that holds the potential to shape the world in ways that are often invisible but incredibly powerful? Silence, in this sense, is not an absence. It is a language all its own, a language of subtlety, strategy, and quiet wisdom. Emotional power is one of the most understated forms of influence in human relationships, and it is a power that women have wielded for millennia, though often in ways that go unnoticed or unacknowledged. This is the feminine energy that operates on a level deeper than words, a force that can alter the course of decisions, shape the dynamics of relationships, and influence outcomes without ever being recognized for what it truly is. In societies where emotions are often dismissed or undervalued, especially in public life, the feminine emotional energy can become an invisible force that drives change from behind the scenes. Women, throughout history, have been the quiet conductors of this emotional power. In their roles as mothers, wives, daughters, and friends, they have navigated the emotional undercurrents of their families and communities, guiding others through turmoil, joy, loss, and victory. And yet, their contributions have often been minimized or erased, seen as women's work, rather than the foundation upon which societies are built. Consider how emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions, has often been attributed more to women than men. It's no coincidence. Women have long been attuned to the emotional landscapes of those around them. They read the room, pick up on subtleties, and know when something is off long before others do. This ability to sense, absorb, and navigate emotional energy is a type of influence that cannot be seen on the surface, but can profoundly impact everything from personal relationships to global movements. But what happens when this emotional power is suppressed or ignored? What happens when the world refuses to recognize its value and instead prioritizes intellectual, physical, or visible power? We end up with a world where emotional labor is taken for granted, where empathy and nurturing are undervalued, and where the feminine energy that has been so central to human connection is relegated to the sidelines. However, if we look at history with a deeper lens, we see that this emotional power, this feminine energy, has always been at the core of transformative moments. From political movements to social change, women have often been the silent architects, using their emotional power to shift perspectives, inspire action, and create profound social shifts. It is not through loud speeches or declarations, but through the quiet work of guiding hearts and minds that the greatest revolutions often begin. What if, instead of dismissing women's emotional intelligence, we celebrated it as one of the most potent forms of influence? What if we recognized that the emotional energy women bring into the world isn't just a passive force, but a dynamic and transformative power that shapes destinies and alters the course of history? One of the most profound and often overlooked aspects of male-female relationships is the unconscious influence that women, whether through their real selves or their projections, have on men. This influence is not always clear, and it doesn't always come from the women themselves. It can also come from the unconscious feminine force within men that they project onto women. It's here, in the realm of the unconscious, where much of the mystery and complexity of male-female dynamics lie. For men, this means that they are often not truly interacting with the woman in front of them, but with the projection of the feminine that exists within their psyche. This projection, the anima, as Jung would call it, represents an idealized image of the feminine, one that is shaped by childhood experiences, cultural conditioning, and emotional needs. And because this projection operates unconsciously, men are rarely aware of its influence on their thoughts, desires, and actions. This dynamic creates a disconnect. Men may feel drawn to a woman because she mirrors this inner projection, this idealized image they carry with them, rather than connecting with the woman as a full, complex person in her own right. They might fall in love with an idea of a woman, not the reality of who she is. This leads to cycles of attraction, confusion, longing, and ultimately disappointment, as the man comes to realize that the woman can never live up to the projection he has created in his mind. But what happens when a man becomes aware of this unconscious relationship with the feminine? What happens when he begins to recognize that his desires, his frustrations, and his attraction to women have less to do with the women themselves and more to do with his own projections and inner conflicts? This awareness is the first step toward breaking free from the endless cycle of idealization, disappointment, and confusion. Socrates, with his relentless questioning, would have encouraged men to explore this unconscious relationship, to ask themselves, are they truly seeing the woman in front of them, or are they seeing only the projection of their own needs and desires? He would have pushed them to question the assumptions they make about women, assumptions that, when left unexamined, trap them in patterns of behavior that limit their ability to experience authentic, transformative relationships. What if, instead of projecting their ideals onto women, men began to see them as full, complex beings, just as flawed, beautiful, and real as they are themselves? What would change if men were able to recognize that the true nature of their attraction and desire is not shaped by an unconscious projection, but by a deep, conscious recognition of the feminine in its entirety? The path to understanding the feminine is not just about understanding women, but about understanding ourselves. Only by confronting our own projections, illusions, and biases can we begin to break free from the cycles that keep us from truly connecting with the women in our lives. One of the most profound aspects of male-female relationships is the way in which women act as mirrors to men. This is not a metaphor in the traditional sense, but rather a psychological truth that operates on deep, unconscious levels. Women reflect back to men parts of themselves that they may not even realize are there: their desires, their fears, their weaknesses, and their hidden strengths. Throughout history, the image of women as reflections or mirrors has been both feared and revered. Men have projected their desires, frustrations, and expectations onto women, often seeing them not as individuals in their own right, but as symbols of something deeper within themselves. But what happens when we step beyond these projections and see women as they truly are? When we allow them to reflect not just the desires we project onto them, but our entire inner landscape, we enter a new realm of self. This reflection is not just about the surface-level desires or the superficial aspects of attraction. It goes deeper into the unconscious parts of the male psyche. Women, by simply being themselves, can challenge men to confront their own hidden complexities. These reflections can stir up feelings of discomfort, vulnerability, or even fear, but they also invite transformation. When a man sees himself through the eyes of a woman who truly sees him, he is forced to confront not just his strengths, but his weaknesses, his insecurities, and his hidden desires. This kind of encounter is not always comfortable. In fact, it is often unsettling. It asks men to question their beliefs, their identities, and their roles in relationships. But this discomfort is the very thing that leads to growth. It is through these reflections that men can begin to uncover parts of themselves they have long denied or hidden away. Women, in this sense, become not just partners or lovers, but mirrors of transformation. The key to this dynamic is recognizing that women are not simply reacting to men or performing a role, they are active participants in the process of self-discovery. They may not even be aware of the depth of their influence, but by being present and true to themselves, they create an environment in which men are forced to see themselves clearly. This is the power of the feminine, the ability to reflect back to men not just who they want to be, but who they truly are. What would happen if men embraced this reflection fully, without fear or resistance? What if they welcomed the discomfort that comes with being seen for who they really are, rather than clinging to the projections and illusions they've created? Perhaps, in doing so, they would step into a new kind of relationship, one based on truth, mutual understanding, and personal growth. The feminine is not here to serve as a passive object of desire or a silent figure waiting to be validated. It is here to challenge, to transform, and to awaken. The true power of women lies not in their ability to please or entertain, but in their ability to mirror the unseen aspects of men's souls, reflecting not only their potential, but their hidden truths. Throughout history, women have been seen through many lenses, some positive, others negative. They have been admired, objectified, revered, and often misunderstood. However, what is most striking is that, regardless of how society chooses to perceive them, women have consistently played an essential role in the transformation of men. This transformation, however, isn't always as overt as a grand gesture or dramatic shift. It often occurs in subtle, almost imperceptible ways through their presence, their challenges, and their ability to simply be who they are. When men enter relationships with women, whether romantic, familial, or professional, they are often unconsciously called to evolve. This evolution is not about changing who they are, but about becoming more fully themselves. Women, through their own complexity, mirror back to men parts of themselves that they either refuse to acknowledge or don't even realize exist. This is where the feminine becomes a catalyst for growth. Women, without even intending to, can lead men to confront the aspects of their personality that they have buried or neglected. These confrontations are rarely comfortable. They often bring up deep-seated fears, insecurities, and suppressed emotions that men have long avoided. But in this process of confrontation, there is an opportunity for profound change, a chance for men to shed old patterns of behavior, belief systems, and limitations. Consider, for instance, the way women challenge men emotionally. They can create moments of deep reflection through their words, actions, or silence. These moments stir something within men, something that calls them to question their past actions, their motives, and their deeper desires. This is not manipulation. It is a form of emotional alchemy, where the raw materials of human experience are transformed into something greater. But transformation requires vulnerability. Men must be willing to step outside their comfort zones, to face the uncomfortable truths about themselves, and to accept that the feminine force, whether embodied by a woman or simply present as a concept, has the power to catalyze deep, life-altering change. This power isn't one of control, nor does it involve domination. Rather, it is the power of presence. It is the ability to simply be, and, in doing so, to inspire and provoke the transformation that men, whether consciously or unconsciously, seek. What if men stopped seeing women as mere reflections of their desires, or as obstacles to be overcome? What if they began to view them as partners in their own personal evolution? What if they understood that, by allowing themselves to truly be seen by the feminine, they would unlock their own potential? The feminine does not seek to control or manipulate. It seeks to guide, to challenge, and to awaken. When men embrace this role of the feminine as a catalyst for their own growth, they enter a new phase of self-awareness, a phase in which they begin to understand that their relationship with women is not a static one, but a dynamic force of personal evolution and transformation. Socrates' relentless pursuit of truth is what made him not just a philosopher, but a disruptor of the status quo. He didn't accept superficial answers, he dug deep, peeling away layers of assumptions until only raw, unvarnished truth remained. In his dialogues, Socrates would push his interlocutors to question everything they thought they knew, and in doing so, he sought to uncover not just the surface realities, but the deeper essence of things. So, what if Socrates had asked the same question about women? What if he had focused his probing, challenging inquiry on the most fundamental aspect of human relationships, the question of what women truly want? This question, though seemingly simple, carries within it the power to upend everything we think we know about attraction, desire, and human connection. In today's world, we often find ourselves trapped in cycles of confusion, frustration, and longing in our relationships with women. We chase after what we think they want, but so often, our desires are misguided. We fall in love with projections, the fantasies we've built up in our minds about what women should be, or what we want them to be. We project our own emotional needs onto them, seeking fulfillment in ways that don't truly connect with who they are. Socrates, however, would have pushed us to dig deeper. He would not have been satisfied with the superficial question of what women want. Instead, he would have asked, what assumptions are we making about women that blind us to the truth? What parts of our own psyche are projecting desires onto women that may not reflect their true essence? And how much of our confusion in relationships comes from not truly seeing women as they are, but as the projections we've created for them? This deeper inquiry isn't easy. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our assumptions. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, beyond the superficial roles society has assigned to women, and to confront the true complexity of the feminine. It forces us to acknowledge that women, like men, are full, complex beings with their own desires, fears, dreams, and identities. So, what if we asked ourselves the hard questions? What if we stripped away the projections, the assumptions, and the fantasies, and truly asked, what does this woman in front of me truly want? Not just in terms of relationship dynamics or romantic desires, but in terms of her own authentic, unspoken needs and desires. What if we recognize that, just like us, women are seeking to be understood, to be seen, and to be valued for who they truly are, not for the roles we expect them to play? This is where true connection begins, when we stop projecting, stop idealizing, and start truly seeing. When we begin to ask the deeper questions, not just about what women want, but about what they need to feel heard, understood, and respected as individuals. This is where real transformation happens, both for men and for women. The dynamics of attraction between men and women are filled with contradictions. On one hand, men are taught to desire women to chase, conquer, and possess. This pursuit of desire is often framed as the ultimate goal, a symbol of masculinity and success. But in doing so, men often overlook a profound truth, that true power does not lie in possession or control, but in understanding, respect, and presence. Desire, in its purest form, is not about domination. It's not about winning or achieving something to be displayed. True desire, at least the kind that leads to deep and meaningful connection, is born from an awareness of the other's humanity, from a place of mutual respect and understanding. But in a world that rewards conquest and validation, it is easy to lose sight of this truth. Men fall into the trap of seeking external validation, performing in ways they think will gain them approval, only to find that their relationships are based on illusions. This paradox is further complicated by the power dynamic that exists between men and women. Historically, men have held the reins of power in most societies, while women have been relegated to secondary roles. But what if the true power in relationships isn't about dominance at all? What if the real power lies in being able to connect deeply with another person without the need for control, without the need for validation, without the need for anything other than the truth of the moment? The feminine, in all its complexity, offers a profound lesson in this paradox. Women, often socialized to be silent, passive, and deferential, hold a quiet power that goes unnoticed by many. It is not a power that demands attention or seeks to control. It is a power that invites connection, that fosters understanding, and that shapes the dynamics of relationships in ways that are often invisible but incredibly impactful. This power is not one that can be seized. It cannot be dominated, controlled, or even fully understood from the outside. It is something that must be met with respect, with presence, and with vulnerability. The power of the feminine is a paradox in itself. It exists not in force, but in subtlety, not in dominance, but in presence, not in control, but in connection. Men, who have long been taught to see desire as a conquest, must learn that true desire is not something to be won, but something to be understood. True desire is born from mutual recognition, from a deep, unspoken understanding of the other person. This is the key to breaking the cycle of frustration and longing, learning to let go of the need to control, to perform, and to conquer, and instead allowing desire to become a force of connection and mutual respect. As we come to the final stages of this exploration into the feminine, we confront a truth that is both liberating and unsettling. The feminine, in all its power and mystery, is not something that can be fully understood, defined, or even tamed. It is a force that exists beyond the boundaries of society's expectations and the limitations of human understanding. For centuries, women have been viewed through narrow lenses, either as objects of desire, to be controlled and conquered, or as passive figures, whose role is limited to support and service. But the deeper truth is far more complex and transformative. The feminine is not just a role to be played or a symbol to be revered. It is a living, breathing force that transcends the boundaries of gender, culture, and time. It is an energy that moves through all of us, regardless of our sex. And when we open ourselves to it, we begin to understand that the power of the feminine is not about submission or domination, but about transformation. What if the ultimate truth about the feminine is that it is not something to be understood, but something to be experienced? What if, instead of seeing women as puzzles to solve or ideals to chase, we saw them as sacred forces of transformation, mirrors, reflecting not just who we want to be, but who we are, deep down? In many ways, the feminine invites men to confront their own shadows, the parts of themselves that they have hidden, denied, or feared. This confrontation is not about rejecting the feminine, but about embracing it fully, in all its complexity and contradictions. For men, this is the most difficult truth to face, to understand that women are not here to save or destroy them, but to awaken them, to help them shed the layers of false selves and step into their true power. When a man truly begins to see the feminine as a force of transformation, he no longer seeks control or approval. He learns to embrace vulnerability, to stand firm in his own truth, and to navigate the complexities of human connection with authenticity and depth. This is not an easy journey, and it requires courage, the courage to face the parts of himself he has kept hidden, the courage to allow himself to be seen for who he truly is, and the courage to honor the feminine as a sacred force that is as much a part of him as it is of her. This is the paradox of the feminine. It is both soft and powerful, elusive and ever-present, nurturing and transformative. It does not seek to control, but to awaken. It does not demand, but invites. It does not offer easy answers, but challenges us to find our own truth deep within ourselves. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate truth of all. The feminine is not something outside of us. It is a part of us, a force that lives in every man, every woman, and every human being. To embrace the feminine fully is to embrace the fullness of life itself, the complexity, the mystery, the chaos, and the beauty. And when we do, we unlock not only the power of relationships, but the power of our own transformation.